So I'd like to take a moment and to invite us all to engage in what we can humanly do today, and that is to go and give somebody a hug, tell them hi, look in their eyes, let them know they matter, let them know we appreciate them being here. So please, come on, let's do it.
I love you too.
Come on, give it up, give me that love, give me that love.
Oh, it's so good to see you. I've been missed everybody so much.
I love you, love you. Love you too. Hi, Janet. Good to see you.
You too. How you doing?
Wonderful. Good. How about you?
Wonderful.
Good.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. I love you.
Thank you. Yeah. She's in Jefferson.
How you doing?
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we are entering into our theme for the month of February, which is change everything. Change everything. And someone say everything. Everything. The principles we'll be working with today is number 10. We believe in the eternal goodness, the eternal loving kindness, and the eternal givingness of life to all. And number 8, which we heard earlier, we believe that the universal spirit, which is God, operates through a universal mind, which is the law of God. And that we are surrounded by this creative mind which receives the direct impress of our thought and acts upon it. And number 7, we believe in the direct revelation of truth through our intuitive and spiritual nature, and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. So I'm sure you all have heard this before. Trouble don't last always. Right? Trouble don't last always, but the stories we tell ourselves about the troubles do. Until we change them. Until we change them. So I want to read just a few snippets from the book that I'm working with by Dr. Wayne Dyer, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, Live in the Wisdom of the Tao. And so I'm reading from Roman numeral 12. He says that the Tao, that it's a mind, that one of the gifts of the Tao is that its mind-stretching quality is in the way that Lao Tzu uses irony and paradox to get you to look at life. If you think that being forceful is the appropriate response, Lao Tzu urges us to see the value in being humble. If action seems called for, he asks you to consider non-action. If you feel that grasping will help you acquire what you need or want, He counsels you to let go and be patient. In this, he says that a complete surrender to ideas is understanding that ideas and our understanding of them are not always linear and rational. He says this, I know that we humans are like the rest of the natural world, and that our sadness, fear, frustration, or any troubling feeling cannot last. Nature does not create a storm that never ends. Within misfortune, good fortune hides. Just a couple more things here. All right. In the first verse of the Tao, Lao Tzu tells us that the Tao is both named and nameless. This sounds paradoxical to our Western intellect, and it is. Paradoxical thinking is embedded in Eastern concepts such as yin and yang, or the feminine and the masculine, and where things are comfortably described as both this and that. We in the West, by contrast, tend to view opposites as incompatible concepts that contradict each other. And he also says here in verse 2, he asks, has it ever occurred to you that beauty depends on something being identified as ugly? Therefore, the idea of beauty produces the idea of ugliness and vice versa. Just think of how many concepts in this duality belief system depend on opposites. A person isn't tall unless there's a belief system that includes short. Our idea of life couldn't exist without that of death. Day is the opposite of night. Male is the antithesis of female. What if you instead perceive all as a piece or a glimpse of the perfection of oneness? I think this is what Lao Tzu is suggesting with his description of the sage who lives openly with apparent duality and paradoxical unity. Imagine the perfect oneness coexisting in the apparent duality where opposites are simply judgments made by human minds in the world of 10,000 things. Surely the daffodil doesn't think that the daisy is prettier or uglier than it is, and that the eagle and the mouse have no sense of the opposites we call life and death. The trees, flowers, and animals know not of ugliness or beauty, they simply are, in harmony with the eternal Tao, devoid of judgment. As the sage lives openly with apparent duality, he synthesizes the origin with the manifestation without forming an opinion about it. Living without judgment and in perfect oneness is what Lao Tzu invites his readers to do. He invites our wisdom to combine perceived opposites and live a unified life. We're talking about change.
Right.
Everything. Neal Donald Walsh, in his book on, when everything changes, change everything. He defines change this way. He says, change is the shifting of any circumstance, situation, or condition, physical or non-physical, in such a way that the original is rendered not merely different from what it was, but is altered so radically as to make it utterly unrecognizable and impossible to return to anything resembling its former state. Change. So, we all have heard that we are made in the image and likeness, and we often hear say that we are whole, perfect, and complete. And changing everything is becoming aware of our wholeness and our perfection. Changing everything is engaging in the act of becoming more aware of our wholeness and our perfection, everything that is complete about us. Because the truth is that we're not meant to stay the same, and we know this. Our lives are not meant to stay the same, and we know this. We are born. We are always, from the time that we are born, even before we are born, are engaged in the act of receiving, and all that we are receiving by means of this act, it is to change us. Nothing stays the same. And so, in fact, as I said, everything we do is because of our desire, our innate desire to grow, to change. It is our very nature, inherent within us, to want to be better and to do better. That is until we get to a point where, for many number of reasons, something happens and we start to ignore our inherent desire to change. Something happens and suddenly we decide to ignore it or to muffle it. Sometimes we do this momentarily, and sometimes we do this for very long periods. We ignore and we muffle the very thing that is our nature, our desire to be better and to do better, to change something in our life where it is utterly unrecognizable and impossible to return to anything resembling its former state. And so, the reason that we ignore or muffle our desire to change is because we've forgotten that something within us. Remember, I just said that we are whole, perfect, and complete, made in the image and the likeness of the divine. And oftentimes we forget that. We forget that something within us, as Ernest Holmes would say, that something within us that is supreme. That's something within us that is supreme. And because we've forgotten it, because we've forgotten about it momentarily or for long periods of time, we go into panic. We start to panic. George Bernard Shaw says that progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change a thing. I think you should turn to your neighbor and say, if you can't change your mind, you can't change a thing. That one is so good, I think you should turn to your other neighbor and say, if you can't change your mind, you can't change a thing. In other words, people are telling everybody. In other words, if you can't accept what is, when things don't go your way, when things don't go the way that you have planned it to be, then you can't change a thing. Then you can't change a thing. And as long as we are in that place, we'll never change. We'll never change because we are unwilling to be with our feelings. We're unwilling to be with our feelings. And because we are unwilling to be with our feelings, We live in a world then where we are conflicted. Instead of being convicted, we live in a world where we are conflicted. Where suddenly the unrecognizable becomes recognizable again. You're conflicted because now what's possible includes what happened in the past. That's not convicted to live in something new, it's conflicted.
Yes.
It's already happened, you're conflicted. You're inviting the old, recognizing it as something new, and allowing it to be a part of the infinite field of possibilities that's available to you. And so instead of being convicted, we're conflicted, convinced that we are, instead of being convinced that we're whole, perfect, and complete. And this sometimes shows up when we are saying these things to ourselves, when we are saying to ourselves that we're not good enough, that we're not smart enough, that we're too old, that we're too young, that it's too much to do, that no one loves me. In other words, that things are never going to change. There's a chapter in Living the Science of Mind, and it's titled, Why Talk So Much About God? That's the title of the chapter. And in it, Ernest Holmes says, I'm just going to read just a couple of things here. It's not going to take me a long time.
Take your time, Pastor.
He says in the chapter entitled, Why Talk So Much About God, on page 107, he says, there is nothing that gives greater satisfaction than to believe in a supreme intelligence with which we may commune and an infinite power with which we may consciously deal. He says, we need to know with scientific certainty that there is a consciousness and a power in the universe that responds to us definitely, directly, and dynamically. Each individual must arrive at a place in his own consciousness where this contact is so immediate and so dynamic that if every other living soul denied it, he would still know. Without this inner conviction, neither faith nor understanding is possible. We would be dependent on a forlorn hope which might vanish in the hour of need. That this infinite power and supreme intelligence is ever available is where we should be turning our mind and our attention to. He said, the reason why is because you and I, we must know this. You and I must begin to become aware of our wholeness and our perfection. Why talk so much about God? Because it's necessary.
Absolutely.
It's necessary. When nobody else knows, you know.
I know.
When nobody else knows, you know.
Yes.
Why talk so much about God? Why is it so important? So you can change
Yes.
everything. Everything. So you can change everything.
That's right.
And so as practitioners, in our training, we learn to listen. We learn to listen to what those that are before us are sharing with us. We learn to listen to their stories, to the stories that they are telling themselves about their life. What happened? When it happened? Who said what? Who did what? How it made them feel. The story that many of us Okay, all of us that we tell ourselves these stories. As practitioners, that's what we do. We listen. And I would say that oftentimes, and dare I say all the time, that the stories that we tell ourselves are not complete. The stories that we tell ourselves are not complete.